Hello, this is Ruth Hollingshead, trustee for Site for Wight, welcoming you to this week's Talking News.
Site for Wight Talking News for Friday, the 18th of September, 2020.
This is Chris, reading an article from the Island Echo. The Director of Public Health for the Isle of Wight joins other health chiefs on the island who have spoken out about problems with capacity at the drive-in testing site. Troubles getting a COVID-19 test on the Isle of Wight has led heads of public health bodies to call on the government to do something to help a faltering system. Residents have been struggling to book a test, either at the testing site at New Close Cricket Ground or via post, since problems arose surrounding national lab capacities. However, the issues have left Simon Bryant, the island's Director of Public Health, with, in quotes, his hands tied around his back, as he has been given local control but cannot do anything. Speaking at a meeting of the Isle of Wight Council's Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Health and Social Care, Mr. Bryant said, "I know there have been challenges with testing, particularly in the last 2 weeks, due to a national issue in the labs as the capacity hasn't kept up with the demands, which is a huge problem. We are working with our Department for Health and Social Care colleagues as much as we can to increase testing capacity." Mr. Bryant also said the 75-mile limit for travelling for a test was completely inappropriate, but even more so for the island. He said, "It is not acceptable to have people travel far for a test. We are doing all we can, but this is a national problem we are trying to solve." Dr. Michelle Legg, Chair of the Isle of Wight Clinical Commissioning Group, CCG, told the committee of the troubles the team are having at the drive-in testing site. She said, "There hasn't been any internet access to book tests at the site. There hasn't been any availability to get postal delivery, and we are advising people not to drop in. We have had several inquiries about this. The police have been queuing outside because they want to know what to advise people who are ringing. This has to be escalated nationally, extremely quickly. We haven't even gone into winter yet or had a surge, and the system is already faltering. They have to sort this out." Chief Executive of the Isle of Wight Council, John Metcalfe, said he and the 22 bosses of upper-tier local authorities in the south have written to the Secretary of State asking for more access to tests to make the local programmes work. Mr. Bryant said, "We are pushing it and we are seeing extra lab capacity coming online, but it is our biggest risk. If we cannot test people, we do not know who has got COVID-19, and then we cannot trace them. It is difficult because we have been given local control, yet my hands are tied behind my back, so I cannot do anything. But we are working very closely with the NHS Trust and the CCG to see if we can come up with local solutions in the interim." Mr. Bryant also said contact tracing programmes on the island were going really well, with well over 80% of contacts on the island and in the southeast being traced. A local track and trace programme alongside the national one is also in the pipeline, with the public health team looking at how and when it could be stepped up. It was also reiterated that you should only book a test if you are showing symptoms. but to keep trying to get one on the island with the different slots released at different times of the day.
This is Howard reading an article in the Island Echo about proposals for a section of the Military Road. Plans have been submitted to the Isle of Wight Council by Island Roads to help remove any instability at the section of Military Road between Brook and Hanover Point might face in the coming years due to cliff erosion. Currently, the 25-metre section of road is in danger of disappearing should there be more cliff movements, with some parts being 20 metres away from the cliff edge and others less than 5 metres. According to planning documents, it's the section of the Military Road closest to the cliff edge, apart from Afton Down. The proposed works would isolate it from coastal cliff failure and provide a short to medium-term temporary protection scheme. 26 piles would be bored into the ground, going 21 metres deep, with shallower piles between the big ones, allowing the water to pass. In the environmental survey attached to planning documents, surveyors said at the rate of recession currently happening, the cliff edge would meet the road in as little as 7 to 8 years. Action on the site is a specific requirement of the Highways PFI contract. The first option considered for the site was to build a bridge structure supporting the road instead, but it wouldn't last as long. The current scheme is the preferred option, and documents say it could be future-proofed if necessary. Planning agents said, closure of the road is a real risk unless there is intervention that prevents the collapse of the carriageway. It's thought that if the plans get approval, it would take 8 weeks to complete, but a road closure, potentially only part, would need to be put in place. To view plans for the site and comment on the application, you can visit the Isle of Wight Council's planning portal.
This is Den reading from the Isle of Wight County Press. BritBox thriller director loving Isle of Wight life. The Isle of Wight is currently home to one of Britain's top television stars while they film a BritBox series, and the actors love island life so much they want to move here. A stellar cast is filming a 5-part revenge thriller, The Beast Must Die, using local support actors and dozens of island locations. The cast is led by Jared Harris of Chernobyl and The Crown fame, who this year won the Best Actor TV BAFTA. Also starring are Cush Jumbo of Vera and the Good Wife, and Nathaniel Parker, best known for the Inspector Lindley mysteries. The Beast Must Die director, Dom Karushkoshki, exclusively told the county press, "After 2 weeks, the island has treated us well. We've gotten 3 seasons in 1 day. We've gotten the sun, the wind, and I've been delivered grapes to my door by an unknown kind person who grows them. The crew is loving it. The actors are thinking about moving here, and the local football team were kind enough to accept my son into their weekly football club. A very happy director here." The series is an adaptation of the 1938 novel of the same name by Nicholas Blake, the nom de plume of poet Cecil Day-Lewis, father of actor Daniel Day-Lewis. It tells the story of a grieving mother who infiltrates the life of the man she believes killed her son. A huge number of local support actors have been taking part in scenes shot in Yarmouth, Bembridge and multiple other locations. The locations and local actors have been supplied by Island People Agency, run by Dadina Saga.
Hello, this is Steve reading a story from the Isle of Wight County Press, headlined "Scam Warning After Court Parking Fine Email." We are being warned not to fall for emails claiming to be from Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service. They are trying to charge £25 for a parking penalty fine. The email says that will be increased to £100 if it is not paid within 28 days. Complete with a link to pay, the Isle of Wight's Trading Standards team says that it is a scam. The team says, legitimate organisations will never contact you in this way. Never click on links in emails and texts. Scam emails can be forwarded to the Suspicious Email Reporting Service on report@phishing.gov.uk, and that's phishing spelled PHISHING.
Hampshire Police issue statement on policing of new coronavirus rules from Island Echo. Assistant Chief Constable Maggie Blythe of Hampshire Constabulary has written a letter to locals addressing the new coronavirus restrictions. It is now illegal in England to have a social gathering of more than 6 people, dubbed the Rule of 6. Hampshire Constabulary say they will continue to use common sense and discretion to determine what is reasonable under the restrictions imposed on us all. ACC Blythe has said, "We are confident that the people of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight will continue to follow the regulations and guidance as we move on to this next stage. Thanks to everyone's efforts, infection rates in our area remain low, but we've seen rises in cases across the county and in other parts of the country, and we must all continue to take personal responsibility to prevent the spread of this deadly virus." The restrictions introduced on Monday, the 14th of September, mean that gatherings of more than 6 people, indoors or outdoors, are prohibited. There are some exemptions, and you can look at the government website for more information. Limiting the spread of infection is primarily the responsibility of public health and not just down to the police, and we will continue to work with businesses, government, hospitality owners, local authorities, universities and others. Our approach throughout the pandemic has been to engage, explain and encourage people to comply with the regulations, and this will continue. We will use common sense and discretion to determine what is reasonable. As a last resort, we will enforce, whether it's by directing people to leave an area or issuing a fine. We have found that the majority of breaches reported to us can be resolved without having to issue a fine. As you will expect, we have proportionate plans in place with dedicated patrols, and we will be out in our communities speaking to people and making sure they understand what is required. Officers are said to be working hard to keep everyone safe from full range of crimes, and demand is at pre-pandemic levels.
This is an article from the Isle of Wight County Press, read by Terry. Isle of Wight councillors vote themselves a pay rise. Councillors voted to increase their pay by more than £200 last Wednesday night, despite a call to freeze it while the island suffers from COVID-19. At a meeting of the Isle of Wight Council last Wednesday, the members' allowance scheme was passed, which, following the advice of an independent remuneration panel, increases councillors' basic and special responsibility allowances by 2.75%. This means the basic allowance for all 40 Isle of Wight councillors for 2020-21 is now £8,231, a £220 increase from the previous financial year, when councillors received £8,011. Councillor Debbie Andre, leader of the Island Independent Group, however, asked councillors to freeze the allowance increase. She said it is totally inappropriate in this situation we are currently in to be accepting an increase. I know what was agreed as an annual percentage increase, but in light of recent times, I propose we freeze the allowance. The move was only supported by 2 other councillors, Michael Lilly and Paul Fuller, while 6 councillors abstained from the vote. Councillor Barry Downer, John Howe, John Medland, Laura P.C. Wilcox, Ian Stevens and Shirley Smart. However, 29 councillors voted against the motion and with the majority approved the increase. Councillor Richard Hollis said, "The work does not stop. Valuable councillors put in a hell of a lot of work. I don't see why they should be belittled for having a small amount of recompense for the hours and hours that they do." Leader of the council, Councillor Dave Stewart, said, "I would say any councillor can choose not to take any part of their allowance. I also support the raise in staff salaries as they have worked very hard during the pandemic." Cabinet Member for Strategic Finance, Councillor Stuart Hutchinson, said the allowances were linked to the pay awards in the first places to take away any political debates. He said, "We are fortunate to have an independent review panel and we ought to follow the recommendations. Sometimes they will be beneficial, sometimes they won't." Supporting the freeze, Councillor Lilly said, "I accept what others have said, but these are exceptional times, and I think it is important to make the statement to our communities that we want to share with them some of the absolute pain they have. I don't see this as a political statement, but being a human being statement." Councillor Claire Mosdell reminded the meeting of ex-councillor Julia Baker-Smith, who had had to use a food bank while getting the allowance. She said, "The allowances are not huge, and we shouldn't ever compare our financial circumstances to others. We shouldn't be putting people in a position where we have to have this discussion. Bills haven't frozen." Councillor Andrew Garrett also pointed out that should councillors wish to do so, they could always donate the money to charity. Councillor Jeff Brodie said the allowance was pretty low, but is an important element of attracting people to stand as a councillor from ordinary backgrounds. Other increases were made to special allowances some councillors receive for fulfilling other roles in the council, such as being a cabinet member, chair of a committee and a leader of a group. The leader of the council receives an additional £16,462, deputy leader £10,289 and cabinet member £8,231.
This is Sue reading an article from the Island Echo. Millions across the south-east to be vaccinated against the flu this winter. Flu vaccination clinics across the south-east of England, including here on the Isle of Wight, are underway, and the NHS is encouraging anyone who is eligible for a free flu vaccination to book an appointment with their GP or pharmacist as soon as they receive an invitation. This year, the NHS is aiming to vaccinate around 4.5 million people in the southeast, up from 2.6 million last winter, to help prevent the spread of flu. Every year, the flu virus kills people and hospitalises many more. This year, it is even more important people who are most at risk of flu have their free flu vaccination. All clinics will run in line with infection prevention control and social distancing measures will be in place. For the first time, children in school year 7 and household contacts and carers of those of the NHS shielded patient list are all eligible for the free vaccination. These groups are in addition to people aged over 65, those under 65 with long-term health conditions, pregnant women, children aged 2 and 3 and children in primary school. Vaughan Lewis, Medical Director for the NHS England and NHS Improvement South East region said, "This year with both the flu virus and COVID-19 circulating, flu immunisation is more important than ever to reduce infections, protect each other and protect the NHS. There is an expanded list of priority groups this year, and we are offering the vaccine to children aged from 2 to 11, as well as those over the age of 65, and anyone with chronic illness, including diabetes and weight problems. So if you have a body mass index of more than 40 or a chronic illness or learning disability, look after yourself and protect the NHS by having the flu jab." People aged between 50 and 64 who are not in a clinical at-risk group may also be offered a free flu vaccination later in the year, providing there is enough vaccine available. This is to ensure that those who are most at risk are vaccinated first. Anyone of any age, including those between 50 to 64, who is a household member or a carer of a shielded patient, is eligible for the flu vaccination from September onwards and should contact the GP practice they are registered with or their pharmacy to book an appointment. Flu is a highly infectious disease that is spread from person to person and infects the respiratory system, where it can lead to pneumonia and other complications. The flu viruses are constantly changing, and this is one of the main reasons why people should be vaccinated annually. The symptoms that come on very quickly include fever, chills, headaches, aches and pains in the joints and muscles, and extreme tiredness. The best way to avoid getting the flu is by having the vaccination. Doing so reduces the risk of developing the illness significantly. For a full list of priority groups and other information about this year's flu vaccine, visit www.nhs.uk and search for flu vaccine.
This is Howard reading an article from the Island Echo about changes to St Mary's Hospital provision. Weekend operations, private treatments and a third MRI scanner are just some of the actions being mooted at St Mary's Hospital to help catch up with the backlog caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As the island's only hospital tries to recover from the effects of coronavirus, some services are getting a boost. Solutions are being introduced to help the Isle of Wight NH Trust after some services stopped and significant delays for treatments caused waiting lists to get longer. Speaking at a meeting of the Isle of Wight's Council's Health and Social Care Scrutiny Committee, Claire Gowland, Deputy Chief Operating Officer for the Trust, laid out how the Trust aims to recover. She said, "The most important thing is that we communicate with our patients. We make sure they understand they've not been forgotten, what the options are, and the timescales involved. Patients waiting for procedures have been prioritised in clinical order, with some island residents being offered private treatment on the mainland. Some of the actions will help provide additional capacity, extending theatre days and potentially bringing in clinical teams to operate over the weekend. New equipment is also being considered. A third MRI scanner, hopefully available by January 2021, and a third CT scanner, potentially available in November this year. Both would clear the backlog by March 2021. Staffing challenges in the endoscopy unit mean the Trust is looking at bringing a company in using the hospital's facilities to manage the waiting times. Despite these steps, a number need financial approval and are being considered, which led Councillor Andrew Garrett, a member of the Scrutiny Committee, to ask if there was a plan B should funding not be available. However, bosses have said they're prepared to have difficult conversations with regulators should they not get the money needed, as the Trust remains in financial special measures. At the start of the pandemic, NHS trusts were told by the government and NHS England to do whatever was necessary to help them cope. By the end of July 2020, the Trust had incurred £8.4 million of reasonable costs, which had all been claimed back for reimbursement. All of the Trust's COVID costs have so far been recovered. Darren Cattle, Director of the Trust's Finances, said the Trust's board was unanimous that the patient comes first. He said, "We decided we would invest that money and potentially have a difficult conversation with our regulators about the financial impact of that, as opposed to the worry of not being able to treat our patients." Maggie Oldham, Trust Chief Executive, said the actions are all the right things for the community, but they're being upfront and transparent about the risk it may occur. She said, "Undoubtedly, if we don't get financial support from our regulators, we will have to carry some of the costs ourselves." It was agreed by the Council's Health Scrutiny Committee that if it was needed, a letter would be given to the Trust regulator supporting the actions taken and the costs sustained.
This is Den reading from the Isle of Wight County Press. Tributes to Isle of Wight heritage expert Brian Greening. Much loved Isle of Wight historian Brian Greening has died at the age of 79. Brian was a regular contributor to the county press over several decades through Isle of Wight heritage stories and letters to the editor. He spoke passionately about his hobbies and wrote riveting articles and books, often collaborating with his close friend and war hero, Bill Shepherd. County Press editor Alan Marriott said, "Brian was Mr. Newport in my eyes. He revelled in the nickname Grumpy Greening, but he had a heart of gold and cared deeply about the Isle of Wight, past, present and future. Brian will be impossible to replace as an expert on the history of our county town, and I send our deepest condolences to his family. Among those to pay homage to Brian is fellow island historian Alan Strood. He said, 2 years ago we did a book together, This Island Life, and Brian was a dream to work with. I shall miss his phone calls. I would pick up and without fail Brian would deliver his customary one-word greeting in a military voice. Greening. He would then hold court for 15 minutes, setting the world to rights, which usually involved expletives, and the council in some capacity, and then we would exchange rude jokes. When he felt he'd said enough, Brian had the disarming but amusing habit of abruptly hanging up without warning. Comic wit raconteur, yet beneath it all a sensitive man. He will be sadly missed. Show business journalist John Hammond said, for people of a certain age, Brian was a legend. As a footballer, he was a feared goal poacher. He seldom returned a pass, and it was an excursion if he ever left the penalty area. He used more energy writing his brilliant books than he ever did on the pitch. Brian loved being called Grumpy and lived up to the image. He had an instant sarcastic wit that we all loved, and he was always ready to enjoy a clever reply to top it. On the island's much-loved characters, one of the island's much-loved characters has sadly left us, another true one-off. Friend Malcolm Harding said, Brian and I were friends for 68 years. We became friends at Barton School through our love of sport. Our careers followed the same path, from school summer jobs at Gould Hibbard and Randalls to J.S. Wight's and then BAE. After our wives passed away, this brought us even closer together, going out every Sunday for lunch. I know if anyone required help in any way, Brian would be the first to volunteer. His contribution to local history is immeasurable. Rest in peace, Brian. You deserve it. Thanks for the memories. Friend John Farthing said, Brian's passing is a significant loss to the preservation of the island's heritage, especially that of Newport. I worked with him on a lot of his delving, but it was the partnership of Brian and Bill Shepherd which really fired much of what has been recorded in Brian's books over the last 20 years. Brian had a very straightforward view of life, and his writings always emphasised any social injustices. His illustrated talks to many island organisations, with his special brand of presentation, will be sorely missed. I keep looking at the telephone, but it's not ringing. I am missing him. Hundreds of tributes have poured in on the Isle of Wight Heritage Group Facebook page, speaking of his charm, character and irreplaceable knowledge. It was suggested on there that in a recording of the island's history in such detail, he himself had become a significant part of it.
Hello, this is Steve reading a story from the Isle of Wight County Press, headlined Bryston's Christmas Tree Festival cancelled as a result of pandemic. The popular Bryston Christmas Tree Festival has been cancelled as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The event, now in its 24th year, has raised almost £150,000 for local and national charities since its inception in 1997. Originally the initiative of former rector of Bryston, Reverend Tim Eadie, the festival began with a small number of venues and a few hundred visitors. It has since grown to become an established part of the Isle of Wight Christmas calendar, with 9 venues hosting concerts, displays and a range of other festive offerings for visitors. Festival organiser Chris Goodman said, "This was such a difficult and sad decision to make, as both myself and the committee know the pleasure this event brings to thousands of visitors who travel from across the island and the mainland. It would have been virtually impossible to achieve social distancing, and everyone's health and safety has to be a top priority. It would have been irresponsible to even try. I hope we will be in a position to offer the event again next year. If the pandemic is a thing of the past, it will be an appropriate time of celebration too.
Police carry out Class A drug searches at Royal Mail Depot. Island Echo. Police on the Isle of Wight have carried out an operation to target the supply of Class A drugs being distributed through the Postal Service. Officers on Wednesday visited Royal Mail's sorting offices at Newport and Ryde in a bid to crack down on the supply of drugs to the island. Newport's neighbourhood policing team and local dog unit have been involved in the visits in both Riverway and Nicholson Road. The operation's also been used to enhance the training of working dogs in this line of work. A spokesperson for Hampshire Constabulary has said, "An effective response to drugs networks and county lines demands real collaboration. Hampshire Constabulary works closely with other agencies in both the public and private sectors, as well as the local community, to tackle the supply of drugs. If you have information about drug supplies in your area, please report this to us on 101. Alternatively, you can report it anonymously to the independent charity Crime Stoppers on 800 555 111.
This is an article from the Island Echo, read by Terry. MP outlines proposals for major change in house building on the island. The Isle of Wight's MP has set out plans for a fresh approach to providing new homes on the Isle of Wight, which he says will prioritise the needs of island residents for the first time in generations. Bob Seeley says that he wants to reverse decades of poorly thought out house building, which, in line with central government policy, has prioritised mainland house buyers over the needs of islanders young and old. He says island housing needs a rethink, and I am seeking a major change to the way we approach the provision of new homes on the island, so that we put islanders first. The government's current proposals for reforming our planning system cause me great concern, but this review does at least provide us with a fresh opportunity to look at how we make the case for a distinct approach on the Isle of Wight, which has regard for our unique characteristics. The MP is calling for a significant cut in housing targets, but wants almost all homes on the island built for islanders. His plans include championing a rent-to-buy programme to support young islanders' aspirations to own their own homes. Seeley also wants to see a ban on greenfield development in all but exceptional circumstances. He says, for the first time in 50 years, we need to prioritise the building of 1- and 2-bedroom housing for our young people, but also for older people wanting to downsize. We need to build for islanders. We don't have the infrastructure capacity for significant development. We need to build on brownfield sites located within our existing communities rather than on greenfields in the countryside. We need new housing to be genuinely affordable so that we don't force our young people away. It is important that we get this right so that we protect the Isle of Wight for future generations. Mr. Seeley's plans consider the future safeguarding of the Isle of Wight landscape, including proposals to designate more of the island's landscape to protect it for future generations of islanders. The MP said he is keen to see sustainable development in line with the island's UNESCO biosphere status, which would preserve the island's natural beauty for residents and visitors to enjoy. At the heart of this fresh approach is asking the government for an exceptional circumstance in housing delivery for the Isle of Wight due to its separation by sea from the mainland and limited capacity for island builders to construct homes in the numbers requested by the government. The MP said the government-driven housing target for the island was unachievable, with island builders being able to comfortably build about 200 to 300 units per year, nowhere near the level of housing proposed by the government's new formulaic approach. Bob has said he also feared that the island's infrastructure, which is already under pressure, would not be able to cope with the level of building that the government is requesting, and that the likely result of failing to meet the target would result in a loss of planning control by the Isle of Wight Council. Mr. Seeley also said compulsory purchase powers needed to be used more assertively to force developers to sell empty properties. Speaking in response, Isle of Wight Council leader, Councillor Dave Stewart, said, "I welcome this clear vision from the island's MP. He is absolutely right to challenge the government's planning white paper, and we share his concern about the potential implications of those proposals. Our island plan review has been developed in line with what is required by central government, but there is now the opportunity to make the case for a significantly different approach which has full regard for the unique characteristics and constraints of the island. We firmly believe that many more brownfield sites can be utilised to provide much needed new homes for islanders, and in doing so help revitalise our town centres. Over the coming weeks, we will be setting out further details of what this will mean in practice. In the meantime, the Council will be working with the MP to make our case to central government, including in response to the planning white paper. We need substantially lower housing targets on the island, which will be both achievable and acceptable locally, thereby ensuring that our infrastructure can cope with such developments. Working together, I am confident that we can put forward a persuasive case to Westminster and Whitehall to complement the initiatives we will be unveiling locally.
This is Chris, reading an article from the Isle of Wight County Press. Isle of Wight dentist bids goodbye after 60 years. Set on a career in medicine, Farouk Shamash was bemused when a family friend suggested he considered dentistry instead. He'd never heard of the practice. "I'd never been to a dentist," Dr. Shamash admitted. He had to explain that it was a doctor of the mouth. As unlikely as that exchange was, what's even more astonishing is that for the past 60 years, Dr. Shamash has been practicing from the same bright room overlooking the Solent in Ryde. At 85, he's only just retired, thought to have been the UK's oldest working doctor, with that decision more COVID-driven than inspired by any loss of ability or interest. Growing up in Iran, Dr. Shamash's life on the Isle of Wight couldn't have been further from the picture. Educated in English at the American Missionary School in Tehran, he spoke a now vanishing Jewish dialect of Arabic at home and Farsi when visiting shops or speaking with domestic help. He was 13 when he and his family spent 6 months touring England and Europe. Having returned to school the next year, he was called to the principal's office one day. He was told a car and chauffeur were waiting and his mother wanted him home. With that, the life he'd known was over. The house had been quietly sold after his mother was traumatized by a burglary, and the family flew to England the next day. There was no warning. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye or anything, he said. After boarding school in Brighton and studying dentistry at King's College London, Dr. Shamash was headhunted by the owner of what's now Bupa Dental Health in Ryde. He asked me to work with him on the Isle of Wight. I had no idea where that was, so he drew a little triangle and said, "It's there, opposite Southampton and Portsmouth." On a sunny day in November, Dr. Shamash and his late wife Pauline made a boat trip across. Having intended to stay for a couple of years, they ended up buying, and much later selling, the practice in its lovely Georgian building and staying for decades. In those days there was a single traffic light on the whole island, in Yarmouth near the car ferry, Dr. Shamash recalls. Inevitably, changes to dentistry over the past 60 years have been dramatic. When I started, about 60% of people middle-aged or older had full dentures. A few times a week we had patients in to have all their teeth out. People didn't know much about the prevention of gum disease. I liked being a sort of Sherlock Holmes and diagnosing problems. I think I've been a very good diagnostician. I've also loved the people I've worked with and have been pleased with Bupa, who are the fourth owners since I sold the practice and who stay up to date with legislation and make sure we do our best for the patients. As with leaving Iran, Farouk's abrupt retirement means he never got to say goodbye to the patients he's valued for so many years, which he found the hardest thing. When co-workers offered to send on some things he'd left behind, he said no. He would wait until things get better and go back to give them all a hug. Dr. Shamash met his second wife, Billy, when he and his late wife used to go to her restaurant, the Hayloft, now Ganders in St. Helens. They now live in Emsworth in Hampshire, from where he has commuted by car and hovercraft to the island 3 days a week for the past several years.
Hello, this is Lisa, CEO of Sight for Wight. This week I thought I would talk about the difference between face coverings and face masks. A face mask is a form of PPE, personal protection equipment. This item will be fitted to your face and will be completely sealed around your mouth and nose. This is not something you would generally buy in a normal chemist. A face covering is something you can buy off eBay, Amazon, in any chemist. This is a cloth-based article which goes over your face and nose and can have wire that pinches across your nose. It also includes face shields, which are the clear plastic items that have a band around your head. Face masks are PPE and they protect the wearer from infection. Face coverings are not PPE. They do not protect the wearer from infection from others. They simply protect others from the infection of the wearer. It is a legal requirement when out in shops and on public transport to wear a face covering. It is not a legal requirement to wear a face mask. And finally, a quick reminder that if you feel distress or harm could be caused by wearing a face covering, you can call us and we will send you a badge which states you are exempt. This is a self-certification process, but the badges we send are complete with a lanyard for easy display. Of course, there have been changes this week restricting all indoor activities to less than 6 households. We have consulted with other charities and our insurance companies, and Millbrook House regretfully must remain closed to all social activities. They are not essential. We know there are exemptions for some charities who are doing essential work, but the work that we are involved with is mainly social activities, and it is widely recognised that these are not essential. We will, of course, keep you updated. Thank you very much for listening to our Talking News. Keep safe, Lisa.
This year, Sight for Wight is celebrating 125 years, the oldest charity on the Isle of Wight. We are striving to collect 125 prizes to offer our raffle entrance this year. Could you be the one to donate a prize? Tickets will be available in the October newsletter due out the first week of October. If you would like to help us by donating a prize or indeed buy a raffle ticket, then please call us on 52205 or email enquiries@iwsb.org.uk. Your support would be much appreciated. Thank you.
This is Sue reading the scaffolding news for the 18th of September 2020. Cowes area, Cameos 16 Bath Road, 49 Sun Hill, Rope Walk Langley Road, Newport area, 10A Lugley Street, Santander St James's Street, Pyle Street, Ventnor area, South View Grove Road, 56 South Street, 32 South Street. Shanklin area, 95 to 97 High Street, Bar 64 High Street. Freshwater area, Western View, the Broadway Totland, Wessex Cancer Place, Mower Place, Afton Down House, 1 Gate Lane, Ryde area, White City Culver Parade, 3 Downsview Perone Way. This is Sue reading the Skip news for week commencing September the 18th, 2020. Ryde area, 13 Ratcliffe Road, 7 Cothy Road, 79 Park Road / Player Street, 5 South Street, 34 Dover Road, East Cowes and the Cowes area, 56 Victoria Road, Cowes, Sandown area, 26 Carter Street, Ventnor area, Enfield Cottage, Rectory Road, Knighton, Yarmouth, 18 Westway, Newbridge.
Sight for Wight would like to thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Talking News. We would also like to thank our volunteers for reading, and a particular thank you to the Isle of Wight County Press and Island Echo. A special thank you must go to Vectis Radio, who has helped us get vital information to our members.